today's episode, we are revealing our 2023 draft rankings. It is officially redraft season. Going through the rankings today, I had a lot of fun. Keegan, he said it was kind of a stressful experience for him. He was getting rankings shame when he was going through some of his rankings, and I didn't mean to give you rankings shame, Keegan. So I apologize that. It's supposed to be a fun experience for you with the guys. 30,000-foot view. Aidan, we can start with you. What were some of your major takeaways that you got once you went through your first rough draft of your top 150?
One of the biggest things that really stuck out to me is we're in love with wide receivers. When looking at our rankings versus ECR, there's quite a bit of differences in terms of some of these high-end wide receivers and running backs. Just to call out a few. First is Saquon Barkley, who they have as third. Across the board, Shaun, Keegan, then to myself is 10, 7, and 10. So averaging out at about 9 there, so about half a round off. Jonathan Taylor, they've got at 6. We've got at 14, 11, and 11. Again, averaging at about 12, another half round off. And then Josh Jacobs coming in at 9, who we have at 19, 18, and 13. So just below 17 if you aggregate the three of us together. We're definitely wide receiver friendly. I think we've all been playing fantasy football long enough to where we've been burned by hero running back. It's happened to us all. You take Christian McCaffrey or someone round one, he gets hurt and you get burned. It's happened to us all. It's part of fantasy, and I think we're pivoting. So kind of on the other hand there, guys that we're higher on, first would be Cooper Kupp, who they've got at 10. We've got at 4, 3, and 5. Another full round off. Chris Olave kind of skipping down towards about the mid-second, third round wrap there. They have it 30th. We've got it 23, 32, and 20. So again, about half a round ahead there. It's pretty consistent throughout our rankings, especially with all three of us. But that's really my biggest takeaway so far. Things definitely start to even out as you get into some of those middle rounds. Shaun, I know you've talked about the wide receiver avalanche. If you want to tell our listeners exactly what that is and how to maybe prepare for that.
You look at the rankings, and just like with Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, like there's basically just 2 rounds in a row, rounds like 4 through 6, where it's just wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. All the options are really strong, but I think it creates a situation where if you go receiver early and get an elite wide receiver stack in the first 2 rounds, you're going to have an opportunity to take multiple swings at the running back position that could be very profitable for you. So it could be a situation where you actually are drafting dead zone running backs because your wide receivers are so good. Or you go wide receiver, you're able to snag a really strong running back. And then you've got a quarterback, tight end option, and then you're taking running backs in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds. You're taking guys that everyone else is going to be avoiding because they're drafting wide receivers. So you're kind of going against the grain in this situation, but we have really leaned on zero RB, hero RB, and we've really leaned on blue chip wide receivers as the foundation of a strong fantasy roster. Keegan, this has been your MO. You've gone all in for a couple years now, even pivoting away from hero RB, which again, for our listeners, hero RB means you take Christian McCaffrey in the first round, you anchor to him, basically don't draft a running back till like the 8th round because you feel so strong with who you have at running back in the first. But Keegan has been a zero RB guy, which is he's not even taking his starting running back until the 4th or 5th round. So how do you feel about this, Keegan, that a lot of people are wising up to this, taking wide receivers early? Does that make you want to move away from a strategy that's been highly profitable for you? Or do you want to double down and even just continue to stack these elite wide receiver prospects?
I think now, at a point in my fantasy football career, I'm more weighing it against, like, where am I picking in the draft? Because, like, if I'm top 4 picks, right, and I have to wait for a full wrap in a 12-man league, and I don't take a wide receiver there, and I get back to, same at the one spot, I don't take JJ or Jamar Chase, and then who are my options at that back half, right? Like, do I really want to start my league off with maybe Devonta Smith or like an Amari Cooper as my wide receiver 1? Like things like that, right? And maybe it's not Amari, right? But I just don't believe in waiting on wide receiver because the elite talent is very elite when it comes to fantasy production. Like if you take away some of Eckler's outlier statistics last year, like I don't expect him to get 107 receptions. And you look at the point totals for the top 4 running backs last year, and you go look at the point totals for the top 5 wide receivers, or top 6 even, because AJ Brown's right at 300. You're talking about 6 players that'll get you 300 fantasy points in a season that you could potentially miss out on had you not taken one in the top half. Whereas only 4 running backs scored above 300 points last year in fantasy. So it's kind of more about where I'm at in the draft, and also just understanding that wide receivers truly do have a higher ceiling, especially in PPR, right? Those receptions matter. And Austin Eckler having 107 receptions is an outlier, right? Like I don't know if that'll actually happen again with a more balanced attack, so then you take some of those numbers away. But if I'm at the back half of the draft in the first round, sure, I'll go all running back, like a Saquon if he falls to me at value, or somebody like a Nick Chubb, and then pair him with an Amon-Ra, a Garrett Wilson, something like that, right? It more depends on where I'm at. But if I'm in the top 5 picks, I'm probably going to end up going wide receiver.
What I think is really interesting here is this wide receiver approach is really strong. But something that I'm also noticing in our rankings, and something that you want to call out, is that we're basically fading everybody in the late 2nd and 3rd round right now. And we're zoning in on a high-end position and a high-end performer at this position. Tell us a little bit about a major trend that you're seeing in our rankings as well, Keegan.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just because the 3 of us have been doing so much best ball drafts, or it's just because the experience that we've all had in some of our leagues together. And we're talking about the quarterback position here, especially Shaun has these tiered out kind of, and his tier 1 quarterbacks are Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. I actually have Lamar Jackson in my first tier with those 4 guys. So when I'm specifically talking about those top 4 with Jackson, Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen, and I'm thinking about positional advantages year round, the difference it makes to have a Mahomes or Lamar Jackson on your roster when they're on every week is like a 10-point advantage. You know, like if I went up against somebody who's starting Derek Carr or Jared Goff, and maybe they have some good wide receivers, like the point advantage I'm getting on a per game basis at the quarterback position from drafting those elite guys has like shoved them up in my rankings when I think about drafting fantasy football. And it's changed a lot. I think we've seen in our own drafts trends of like a good quarterback might go in the 4th or like late 4th, early 5th for us in our home league. And now I wouldn't surprise to see somebody take a leap on somebody in the 3rd or 2nd. Like I actually have all of the quarterbacks kind of in like that 24 to 28 range from those 4 that I mentioned, almost like back to back to back in my rankings. I just think they offer you such an advantage week in and week out on a points per game basis that other positions can be easily matched on. Like you can take swings at running back in a 0 RB build or a hero RB build and almost match statistical output. Like there's always cases. You think of Tyler Algier in the year, like how he finished, right? Like the Deontay Foremans of the world off waiver wires, right? There's like 4 weeks of solid production from him. There's way easier players to find value on at a running back or a tight end position outside of Kelsey and Andrews maybe than it is with quarterbacks, right? I just don't like to be in that, who am I starting at QB this week? I'd rather just take an elite guy and set it and forget it.
I think there's value to waiting, but at the end of the day, you asked this question, right? Because you had Lamar super high. And I was like, you have Lamar at this place, right? You have Lamar Jackson 24th overall. I love the confidence in Lamar. And I was like, that seems high. And Keegan's response was, you really think you would rather draft Najee Harris over Lamar Jackson? That was his question. And if you look at like expert consensus rankings, they have Najee Harris above Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and Josh Allen. They have Devonta Smith in front of Jalen Hurts. You're telling me you would rather draft Devonta Smith than Jalen Hurts, who was advancing anyone that was on his team to the finals if you had him last year. The guy was a walking 30 bomb. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. I love the idea of recouping late round value in Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. I want to play that game. But in terms of opportunity cost, who in the 3rd round am I taking over these quarterbacks? Like, at the end of the day, those are the best players available. Like, Aidan, do you feel that way? Just take the best player? Like, these guys are going to score the most points.
Yeah, I think that philosophy has definitely changed. I think one of the biggest parts is around like this top tier of quarterbacks these days has that kind of dual threat ability to it. So like you're getting so much more from your quarterbacks these days than you were 5 or 10 years ago. Guys like Lamar, Fields, Josh Allen, like you're getting so much more than just traditional passing nowadays, which can bridge that gap. Like you might be a little ahead of value, but those extra 5-6 points you're getting from those elite quarterbacks are worth it, in my opinion, than grabbing, a wide receiver there in the third round that's maybe gonna, get an extra 2 or 3 guys ahead of them. So in my opinion, I'm not scared to take QBs early. I think that kind of top tier of QBs continues to grow in terms of guys I'm comfortable with getting. I think there's definitely a fine line of guys who you'd be wanting to take in those kind of, second, fourth to fifth rounds. But I think you get a massive advantage, assuming your guy stays healthy and he's giving you that consistent 20, 25, 30 points every week. It's awesome to just lock him in and know that's in your lineup every single week.
On a points per game basis, Jalen Hurts averaged 25.6. Mahomes averaged 25.3. Josh Allen averaged 24.3. Those were your top 3. Kyler Murray, who was a QB 8 on a points per game basis, 18.9. Joe Burrow, who was QB 4, 21.7. If you had Jalen Hurts, you were walking with a 4-point advantage over Joe Burrow. Now, they can regress back to the mean. Shout out the Regression to the Mean podcast, promo code RTM. They can regress to the mean a little bit over years, right? Like, it kind of seems like we had a high-end QB anomaly. Those guys were walking buckets in fantasy.
8 quarterbacks, and if you toss in Daniel Jones, who was only 7 shy, 9 quarterbacks basically had 300 fantasy points on the year, which is substantial amount, like contribution to the end of the year totals. Like you said, their averages are really, really high. And look, why would I draft a Najee Harris instead of a Jalen, a Josh Allen, a Patrick Mahomes when I could go get somebody like David Montgomery, like way later, who I'm pretty high on this year, right? Like, Damian Pierce is like a mid, like 4th, 5th round flyer guy, potentially 6th or something like that you could take that I'd rather have over Najee. Like, there are just so many better options, I think, at running backs, because when you get to that tier of running backs, their points per game differential is like less than a point almost, and they're not giving you a huge edge. Like, it really drops off once you exit like the top 9 or top 10. They're averaging 14 and above points, and then you get down below that and they're averaging 13 or less a game, and most of them are within a point and a half per game of each other. So I just think it's a bit easier to steal value on running backs, and if you miss out on one of those quarterbacks, it's troublesome. Like, you hate walking into the matchup and the guy's got fucking Jalen Hurts and you're starting Jared Goff, and you're vying for a playoff spot, and you just know, like, well, I'm toast.
You have to, like, basically be perfect on the margins. Like, you have to nail all your running back wide receiver picks, where if you just take Mahomes in the 3rd, you're probably going to go to the playoffs. Like, unless you just really get unlucky, you're going to advance. And that's the whole name of the game.
Those league QBs can definitely hide some holes in your roster with that added boost of, 4 or 5 points over some of your peers.
If you took like a Justin Jefferson at 1, and you took, and I'm just looking at our rankings, and then you have the wraparound at the end, you're looking at Patrick Mahomes and like Devonta Smith, or something like Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith, you could do that. And you walk out of your first 3 rounds with Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith, and Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts of your choice, right? Like, if we're talking about that, I'd rather start a draft like that than an Aaron Jones and 2 wide receiver build with JJ in it, right? So it's just like, I'm just trying to think of maximizing my point output on a per like year basis, and I think those elite QBs give you such an edge. So I'll be very high on them this year.
We're high on receivers. We're high on quarterbacks. I like the running backs. I actually think running back is relatively deep this year, but I'd rather just have like a steady rotation of RB2s and then see if I get lucky and any of them turn into RB1s. A position that I'm surprisingly high on, and I didn't expect it since Keegan and I made so much fun of the position throughout the fantasy season. I kind of feeling something in terms of these tight ends. What do you guys think? Are tight ends great again in fantasy football? Like, am I reaching here? Because I kind of feel excited about this group.
I don't know. I'm lower on Kelsey than you guys by about 6 spots. Like, I have him at my 13th ranked player here. I'm way lower on, who is it, Hawkinson, than you guys. Almost 10 spots. Well, 10 spots after Shaun. Aidan's even lower than I am, about 53. I'm 50 and Shaun's 40. And then who's the other big one? Mark Andrews. We're kind of about the same. Shaun's got him at 27. I got him at 34 and Aidan at 26. So I'm definitely lower than you guys
You're
in
down.
general on
You're
tight
down
end.
on tight ends. You're not feeling it.
Travis
okay.
Kelce was the only player on that position to average above 15 points a game last year. He averaged 18.6. TJ Hawkinson had 12.7 a game. George Kittle averaged 13.4. Mark Andrews averaged 12.7. I'd expect Mark Andrews to get back up to like a 14, 15 points a game range. But then after that, I mean, TJ Hawkinson now has Jordan Addison in the offense, so there's some target competition there. George Kittle had some crazy spike weeks at the end to lift up his season, but otherwise was pretty average season. I think Darren Waller has a good bounce back opportunity this year, but on a points per game average, I just don't value the tight end if I don't get Kelce or Andrews like as something that I want to invest heavy draft capital on.
Yeah, I pretty much echo Keegan's thoughts there. I'm with you on Kelce. I'm with you on Andrews, and that's pretty much where I hop off the ship. I have a really hard time investing a lot of quality draft capital in a position like that that's so volatile. It's really just like your tight end 5 versus tight end 10 is going to be the difference of maybe a point or two per week. So at that point, I'd rather just smash running backs, smash wide receivers, and pick up a bit more volume where I think I could cut the margins a bit more. Whereas, again, like I'm fine waiting on tight end. There's plenty of Tyler Higbees and guys around there that are going to get me, 8-10 points a game, touchdown every other week or so. It's really hard for me to rationalize it unless it absolutely falls in my face at good value. Even guys like Pitts and stuff, like I'd love to have on my team, but like the value would have to be right. I'd have to be really confident in the start of my draft in terms of nailing running back and wide receiver for sure. And maybe, like we've already said, have that elite quarterback on my roster to feel good about adding a tight end in, the top 5 or 6 rounds. It's just, it's so expensive for what I see as a very small difference in terms of, that middle of the pack.
Look, let me take you guys on a little bit of a journey here. All right, just bear with me. Travis Kelce would have been wide receiver 4 in PPR last season at tight end.
I'm in on that.
That is the biggest statistical advantage you could find in fantasy football, considering that he plays a position where the tail is terrible and you're basically playing Russian roulette at tight end historically. Mark Andrews last year has a 28% target share. TJ Hawkinson walks into the Vikings offense and immediately is force-fed target after target. Guy had like close to 700 receiving yards in half a season with the Titans. With the Vikings. You have George Kittle, who can have absolute monster spike weeks, and you're getting him later than you've ever been able to get him. Kyle Pitts had like a 30% target share at tight end last season, and he has a real opportunity to deliver on his promise. Dallas Goedert fucking rocks. Darren Waller, huge bounce back opportunity. Darren Waller has an opportunity to lead his team in targets. Same with Pitts, same with Andrews, same with Kelce. You have this weird middle tier of tight end that I really like in Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth. You have the fun up-and-coming tight ends in Greg Dulcich and Chig Okonkwo, guys that could be the second options in their offense. And then you have guys like Dalton Schultz and Tyler Higbee, which are totally fine. It's the missionary position tight ends, right? You're just set it and forget it, and they get their 5 for 50, 4 for 40, and maybe score a touchdown. I just think that's a pretty consistent crop of tight ends that we haven't seen in a while. And I kind of like that it's a deeper position. Like David Njoku, you're getting him outside of the top 100. That's a really talented player and an offense that's going to be throwing the ball a ton. Like he's like an arbitrage George Kittle, and that wasn't around 2 years ago. So I just think it's relatively deep compared to what it is. So you could wait and actually get some really similar players.
Kind of just enforced our argument there, Shaun. So I appreciate that. Outside of Kelce,
you said they're not good. You said they're not good, though, where I just said there's actually a pretty strong middle class of tight ends this year. Like, I think we're actually going to get a middle class, which is really exciting.
Yeah, which would be great, but that kind of enforces what I'm saying. Like, and the reason I have Kelce so low is the kind of argument I made about the elite wide receivers and like what they bring to you. So it's like, if I can get Kelce on a wrap with a bona fide wide receiver 1 rather than doing like Kelsey, Waddle. Like Waddle's a great example for a lot of these, right? Because he's like a wide receiver 2 who's kind of like wide receiver 1 talent. But, if I end up with a Devontae Adams at the end of the first round and then on my bring back, I get Kelsey, like that is really, really cool. But spinning up to get Kelsey, maybe I miss out on one of those guys. Like it's just part of my draft strategy. It's like, it's hard for me to justify taking Kelsey over one of them. And it's always up in the air, but Kelsey is old. You never know. If he regresses,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure he'll burn me this year, of course. But
Keegan, Travis Kelce scored more fantasy points than AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Amari Cooper,
with zero competition in his offense for targets.
I don't think a ton changes this year.
The receiving core is worse this season. And what I'm saying is, you're saying I don't want to miss out on this high-end receiver. He is the high-end receiver, and he plays the position that is like you only get to play one of them a week. And so I'm saying Kelsey's just elite. But your counter argument could be like, well, tight end's stronger this year, so I don't need to take Kelsey as early, which then reinforces I kind of like this group of tight ends.
It'll be
that's too much tight end. It's too much tight end talk. We
yeah, I've had enough. It's my least favorite position.
Keegan and I are going to fight to the death over the Kelsey thing. It's fine. It's fine. Okay, so when we're taking a look at our rankings, we were only aligned on one player in our top 150, and that's actually Justin Jefferson at number 1 overall. That's Justin it. Jefferson. And then immediately started deviating. I had McCaffrey at 2. The rest of these guys had Jamar Chase. But we did have some pretty relatively major differences across some key positions, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to highlight some of the players that we're higher on versus each other and players that we might be a little bit lower on. I'm going through these rankings, right? And something that's really standing out to me is the fact that Keegan Thompson has Anthony Richardson, and this is speaking my language here, right? But Keegan Thompson has Anthony Richardson, whose current ECR, so expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros, is 142. And Keegan Thompson, you have him at 82. 82 overall.
I do.
20 spots ahead of me and 40 spots ahead of Aidan. So this is probably one of our more like really wide range of outcomes, outlier rankings. So I love it. I'm all for it. I'm ready to drink the Kool-Aid. Walk us through your thought process on why you have Anthony Richardson 82 overall. What is he, like your QB?
I don't know what QB that makes him in my rankings, but
he's got to be about QB 10 to I think 12. If I'm just
you have him above you have him ahead of Massage Boy, right?
No, I think I have Massage Boy ahead of him. Redacted is ahead of him. I have Trevor Lawrence ahead of them. My take on Anthony Richardson stems from the legs. It's the run game. It's the Colts are going to play, I think, a simplified offense in Anthony Richardson's first year. He also has a great head coach who has built up some amazing dual threat quarterback talent and developed them. And if I go off reference of Justin Fields' stats last year, right? And I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson is going to have 160 attempts for 1,100 yards, right? But Justin Fields only threw for 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns last year, right? So if you modestly put Anthony Richardson at a similar passing volume and take maybe 200, 300 yards off his rushing ability and put him at like 800 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, let's say 15 like passing touchdowns and 2,500 yards, that is a quarterback top 10 season right there. And that would be a very modest stat line for a guy that I think, Shaun, you're really, really high on, right? I mean, this is a quarterback who has a pretty elite deep ball, very good pocket awareness, and I think people don't give him enough credit for what his actual football smarts and football knowledge and just overall feel for the game is. So if I gave him a modest Justin Fields stat line from last year, he's already a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. That's like my rationale. And that's knocking off of what some of Fields did. I mean, Fields finished as the QB6 last year and obviously an amazing season, but you're telling me Anthony Richardson can't put up 80% of that season next year? And I'm kind of just believing, and like this is a player take more than a ranking and projection take, but I have a sword that I'm willing to fall on, and like that's Anthony Richardson. So I'm just going to stand by my player take and basically go with the assumption he's a top 10 fantasy quarterback next year.
It's funny you mentioned Fields on that because I saw something online. It was like Anthony Richardson's floor is 2021 Justin Fields, which averaged just over 10 fantasy points per game, whereas his ceiling is 2022 Justin Fields. It's like, I think there's a very wide range of outcomes. One of the biggest red flags is like huge accuracy concerns in college. So is he going to be a good passer next year? I don't know. I don't see a great wide receiver room to start with there. But to your point, I think his legs alone are a great floor. Again, you're definitely higher on him than I am, but I think like it's such a wide range of outcomes to where it's hard for me to be nearly as bullish as you are on him. But I'm definitely sipping the Kool-Aid. I'm ready for Anthony Richardson, but it's like I think there's a very wide range of spectrums here, and you're probably drafting him, you know, he's your first QB at that point. So drafting him that high, you could absolutely get burned if, you know, he's closer to 2021 Justin Fields than last year. But that's fantasy. Like, you've got to take risks. So I like it, Keegan. I like the bold flag plant here on Anthony Richardson.
Keegan has him ahead of Daniel Jones, Dak Prescott, and Tua. You have him at QB 9. I am here for that. You guys are talking about 2021 and 2022 Justin Fields. I think what we need to talk about is 2021 Jalen Hurts, which was his first year in the Shane Steichen offense. He averaged 21 fantasy points per game, with Devontae Smith being his wide receiver one, throwing to the likes of Dallas Goedert, throwing to the likes of Quez Watkins. I don't even know who his wide receiver 3 was. But literally, the reason why he did so well is he scored so many rushing touchdowns. And I think when the Colts get in red zone, it's going to be Shane Steichen, QB tush push, Anthony Richardson, rushing touchdowns galore. So I love it. It's bold. But I'm worried that his passing won't get him into the top 10, but his rushing upside will make him a start.
Yeah, my biggest issue too is the passing. I think he probably hovers around 15 to 17 or 18 points a game if I had to.
Before we're off of Richardson, I mean, I'll take Pittman, Pierce, Downs, Jelani Woods, Mo Alley Cox, Jonathan Taylor over what the Bears had last year. And Justin Fields put that up with nobody. Now, I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson is Justin Fields. I'm a big Fields guy. Like, I have Fields ahead of him for sure. But, you know, supporting cast is there. Head coaching's there.
Slightly.
Elite, not slightly. I think it's above average supporting cast for sure. And he is an elite athlete. Elite athlete. I'm pretty high on the rookies, I think, overall in the top 150. So I think they just offer you some unique value and like really like they probably offer like the most intriguing ceilings to me in redraft. And like it's kind of all about like that. Exactly. Anthony Richardson, the reason I have him a little higher too is like if I miss out on the elite guys, drafting Anthony Richardson in a fantasy draft would like make me a very happy man. I would rock with a rookie if I built out the rest of my roster.
You can pair him with a like Daniel Jones, Tua, and you could do like a 2 QB stack and just kind of hope it works out. Another guy that Aidan is super high on is the wide receiver 1 for the Green Bay Packers. Tell us a little bit about your wide receiver 1 for the Green Bay Packers, Christian Watson.
So, yeah,
guy that you just love.
High would definitely not be the term that I would be using to describe Christian Watson. So I'm actually closer to ECR than the two of you. So I put Christian Watson at 69. ECR has him at 65 with Keegan and Shaun at 56 and 50. I just see a lot of question marks with Christian Watson to start with. Like, a couple of guys just to start with that I have before him are Ayuk, Deontay, Mike Evans, Kyle Pitts. These are guys that, in my opinion, are much safer picks, potentially having much higher ceilings that I'd be able to stomach in that range. So the two biggest red flags that I see with Christian Watson are, one, Jordan Love. Everything I read online is Jordan Love is a lot better than we think. And I just don't get it. He's never been an elite quarterback at any level. Has played, 1-2 games in the NFL. And there's going to be a huge learning curve. If Jordan Love is a bottom 5 or bottom 10 QB in the NFL this year, that completely zaps Christian Watson's kind of fantasy, both ceiling and floor. And another one was his ridiculous 14% touchdown rate. That's going to regress to the mean. It was like a lot of Christian Watson's production when he had 41 catches and scored 7 times. Like, that's not sustainable. But we expect him to catch 80 balls and we think he's going to score 14 times. Like, that's not going to happen. He's going to regress to the mean. Like, he's an absolute freak. In terms of his athletic build, he's a very rare combination of speed and size. Like, there is no denying that. But in my opinion,
big and fast.
Big and
fast.
But
I love it. He's so amazing.
So was Martavis Bryant.
So big.
So was Martavis Bryant.
He was
like
good.
He had the same
Martavis
rookie
Bryant
flair.
Was so good.
Christian Watson's probably going to end up having a better NFL career if I had to take a shot in the dark here. But there's just so many question marks with Christian Watson in terms of the sample we got last year. The quarterback that we're getting, no one knows who Jordan Love is. And you're going to tell me that I should be taking him over like Brandon Ayuk? Like, you can't put a gun to my head and do it. Like, I just be like, just do it. Get it over with. Like, I'm not doing it. I'm taking him right around 70 after some of those guys. There's just no. There's too much going on there for me to be stoked off that.
Christian Watson in 2022, 6.7 yak per reception, 4th overall. He had a 14.1 ADOT, 14th overall. A 2.26 yards per route run, 11th overall. He averaged 3.25 fantasy points per touch, 13th overall.
It's not Aaron Rodgers anymore, though. Like,
yeah, Shaun, can you answer the question? Does he have a Hall of Fame quarterback throwing the football still?
You cannot, like,
oh, come on. He
expect
sucked
those
last year.
same
Rodgers
type of
sucked
numbers
last year. Come on.
Okay, you
still
think
threw
here's
like
my question.
4,000 yards.
You think Jordan Love is going to play better than Aaron Rodgers did last year? Because that's basically what you're assuming.
You're assuming
comparable. I think it'll be comparable.
Oh,
I think it'll
my
be comparable.
God. This is that's
straight up.
That's insane behavior. That's no. I can't let you get away with that. I'm gonna clip this and come back to it. It's Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. Like, you're gonna take. So what? Are you taking Watson over Ayuk, Shaun?
Yes.
Oh my God.
His competition for targets is Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, and the rookie Luke Musgrave.
And Aaron Jones.
He's playing against.
Aaron Jones. They're going to...
Okay.
I think they're going to run the shit out of the ball.
I mean, he's the number one target. Guys, this is freaky shit to have that high of a yak per reception.
He played with Aaron Rodgers.
With
Aaron Rodgers. Guys, Jordan Love is not Aaron Rodgers. He's not.
It doesn't matter, bro.
Yes, he does.
He caught an 80-yard touchdown. He caught an 80-yard touchdown from Jordan Love on just an absolute. He just took it to the house on a crosser.
Let me put something in perspective.
Let me put
something in perspective.
I don't want to hear that.
All right. Hey, let me put something in perspective. We are down on Devontae Adams because he is downgrading from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo. You don't tell me that you're the same on Christian Watson after he goes from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. That doesn't
He's higher.
No,
he's higher. He's higher now.
It makes no sense, by logic. It's not logical at all.
I understand. You guys have a knowledge gap on this because there's high amount of bias here. There's a high amount of bias because
I don't have any bias
Keegan
against
cannot
the Packers.
accept. No, listen. No. You have bias with Aaron Rodgers because you're like he's downgrading from Aaron Rodgers. And in my head is no, but listen. In my head, I'm saying it's not that big of a downgrade. You, a Jets fan, you're not going to accept that, right? And then you, a Bears fan, could not handle Jordan Love being good.
He's never been.
It is something that.
That is an insane spin zone to put me in the bias argument. It's one thing to talk about Aidan, but it's insane to throw me in a bias argument as we hype up
the way you were talking about Rodgers.
He's still
you were hyping up Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers
like Rodgers was
threw for
raw
3,700 yards last year on a down year, and he threw for 26 touchdowns on a down year, and he was still pretty good on a deep ball. Christian Watson could have had more touchdowns if he had better hands. To be honest, he could have had a better year.
He dropped a couple.
There's a long history of 39-year-old quarterbacks having a down year and then immediately returning to MVP form.
Gentlemen, all right. So we're going to revisit Christian Watson at the end of the year because there's definitely we're not a united front here.
This is the same guy who thinks Dwayne McBride's going to outscore Ty Chandler this year. So
I love it. This just feeds my soul. I really do love it. Keegan, I really am curious about this, and I think this is really fascinating with what you've done with your rankings. You have probably the hottest pick in fantasy football in terms of one that everyone's dying to make. In Calvin Ridley, you have him at 40th overall, which I think is a really fair spot to put him in. But you also have Christian Kirk literally right next to him at 41. And Christian Kirk is being drafted. I mean, his ECR is 68. So you're way above the expert consensus rankings. And we all like Kirk. But tell me a little bit of your thought process about having Ridley and Kirk right next to each other as the 1 and 2 in this offense.
It starts with one guy, and it starts with Trevor Lawrence, honestly. I mean, this is a potential, I'm not going to call it an MVP season, but this is a potential year for Trevor Lawrence to come out and show us why he is Trevor Lawrence. We got good glimpses and a good amount of that last year, and he was fantastic, threw for 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns. I'd expect him to throw 10 plus touchdowns on top of that this year. Almost 600 more yards. I expect a really big year from Trevor Lawrence, and he's good enough to support 2 stud wide receivers, especially in fantasy. I have Calvin Ridley only 1 spot above because of what Calvin Ridley used to be, and I think that is a better receiver than Christian Kirk. But, I mean, last year, Christian Kirk was wide receiver 11 in PPR, or wide receiver 12, sorry, in PPR on a really, really good season. I think Trevor Lawrence can support both of them, honestly. So I have them back and forth. I could probably go in my head and have Kirk higher just because Calvin Ridley might be a little rusty in the first couple weeks. But I mean, I'm betting on Trevor Lawrence, and I'm betting on him to support 2 pretty relevant fantasy wide receivers this year. I think it's going to be very T. Higgins, Jamar Chase-like, and Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown-like, honestly. I think there's a path for Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley to do something similar, where they're both top 24 wide receivers. That's my vision.
I see Lockett and DK Metcalf. That's kind of the combo that I see. And yeah, it's that 1A, 1B. I think Calvin Ridley steps in and takes a lot of Zay Jones' work. Shout out Zay Jones. But I think Calvin Ridley's probably going to assume a lot of that target share. I'm curious to know how it's spread out amongst that team. There's so many talented pass catchers. There's Evan Ingram, ETN, Tank Bigsby. I think you nailed it, though. These wide receivers, I think, are going to be closer than what people are willing to admit. And I think Trevor Lawrence has an opportunity to go ballistic. And I have Trevor Lawrence closer to Justin Herbert than I think a lot of people are willing to have in their rankings. And I have Lawrence in the 6th round when a lot of people have him in the 8th round. So I'm above ECR and just overall ADP, even in best ball, on Trevor Lawrence. I love what he brings to the table, not only with his wide receiver core and his head coach. I think he's got some wheels too, and he'll run a little bit.
Man,
so
that's a good point,
he
Shaun.
offers something.
I think we haven't really seen that yet from Trevor as he's figured out the NFL game, when to get out of the pocket, when to use his legs. I don't think they're really scheming up stuff for his legs either. And he was a pretty good, I would call it an effective runner in college. And he's a bit more athletic than we've seen in the NFL so far because he's just been adjusting the game and kind of getting used to being a quarterback at the pro level. And I think as he's more comfortable, he'll start taking off, seizing on some opportunities and getting some extra rushing upside this year. I'm not saying he's a full Konami code guy, but yeah, I have him mid 70s, I think, as my ranking. And that's kind of baked into that thought process there. It's because I haven't seen some of the extra running from him. I think him and Herbert will be an interesting case study this year as far as quarterbacks, specifically more pocket type, traditional passing quarterbacks. And can they take the leap into what Mahomes is as a fantasy player as more of a quarterback that we don't really consider Konami code? I think those two, and probably Burrow too, have the potential to be upper echelon of points per game totals just like that. So,
Aidan, do you think that Trevor Lawrence could lead the NFL in passing yards next season? Do you think that's a possibility?
Woo. Yeah, if I had to pick 3 guys, he'd be in that conversation for sure. His second half of the season was pretty impressive. It was a little sluggish to start, and it was definitely a little worrisome for owners. But I think by the end of the year, he absolutely was skyrocketing up quarterback rankings, and I could definitely see him finishing top 3. Calvin Ridley, when he was on in Atlanta, was so special to watch. So I have Ridley and Kirk a little closer than you do, Shaun. I have them about a round apart, which I think is fair. To your point, I think they are a lot closer than people are giving them credit for in terms of where they could potentially finish. But I'm really banking on what we've already seen in terms of Calvin Ridley's ceiling, and that's a wide receiver 1, a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy, and I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. So for that reason, I've got him just past 40 and Christian Kirk at 52. So, yeah, I think you could kind of really flop them around and no one's going to fight you either way. I think there's definitely a path to both of them being pretty fantasy viable.
And real quick on Lawrence, I actually forgot. He did rush for 62. He had 62 attempts last year and did find the end zone 5 times on his feet. Like a couple more of those and only threw 25 touchdowns last year. There's a lot of room for some points there. And Trevor Lawrence.
There's more meat on that bone for sure. There's definitely more to go around.
Agreed on that. But I think, I'm pretty bullish on the quarterbacks overall, especially in that second tier as well, too, with, Herbert, Lawrence, Burrow. You could maybe say, also Fields. That's like they're kind of 5. Maybe 2 of them are in their own tier of Fields and Burrow. But I think Herbert, Lawrence, Fields, and Burrow might all be right next to each other by the end of the year.
Who's someone else you're super optimistic and bullish on heading into this season, Aidan?
I know we've already spoke about him a little bit, but I'm going to keep banging the J.K. Dobbins drum. In my opinion, I just want to keep buying running backs with established roles on good offenses. I know we've spoken about Joe Mixon a lot, and they're different running backs. J.K. Dobbins, especially in a PPR format, is a bit limited in terms of his dual threat kind of role there. But the way he finished 2022 and the role that I think he's going to have in the offense this year, I'm pretty high on him. I've got him ranked as 38, just above ECR's ranking of 41. You guys came in at 51 and 61. A couple of running backs that I ranked him just above were Kenneth Walker and Dameon Pierce. Again, I'm more confident in J.K. Dobbins just given what I think that offense is going to produce. In my opinion, I see a top 5 scoring offense in the NFL. And if that's the case, I think he could definitely result in, a top 12, top 10 running back season. So I'm pretty high on him, assuming he stays healthy. I think the sky's the limit. Dude is still extremely young, taking the injuries out of the equation. Like there actually still is a ton of tread on his tires. It's just, can he stay healthy? And is he really that, focal point in the running back room that we're expecting? So I don't know, maybe a bit higher than others, but would love to hear what you guys think about J.K. Dobbins. I know I'm definitely a bit higher than people.
I want him on my team.
I do too. And I only have him so low because I expect their offense to go a lot more deep into the passing game this year with Monken, but they will also play at a faster pace. I think they'll be near the end zone a lot more. So obviously Dobbins has more end zone opportunities. They just have they still have Lamar as a running threat. I'm not saying Gus Edwards is going to take touches, but they have Gus Edwards. And they have Justice Hill. Justice Hill actually profiles more as a pass catching back, I think, than the other two do. But I just think there's, in PPR specifically, if this was standard, I think I'd have J.K. Dobbins like 20 spots above. But I actually like him. I have him ranked, I know 61, that seems low, but I'm big on J.K. Dobbins. It's somebody I'd like to draft this year. I don't know if the receptions will bring him up to that 38 spot, like 38th best fantasy player, basically, is what we're assuming at that rank. But I don't have a problem with it either. So
I'd rather draft him than Dameon Pierce. And I love Dameon Pierce. I really do. I think really highly of Dameon Pierce. But they're kind of in that same tier for me where it's like the clear number 1 running back in the offense. I just think Dobbins is just so good. He's been so good. And he was so good in college. He was so good as a rookie when he played. He played on one leg last year and was incredibly impressive. The injury history stuff is concerning. He's already holding out over his contract. It's tough. He has no leverage. But the guy is just ridiculously talented. So he's somebody I'm prioritizing. Lead back in a Lamar Jackson offense usually is a really good fantasy player.
Something I'm also noticing just by looking at our rankings, you guys are super low on Mike Williams in redraft. Shaun, you got him at 73. Aidan, you've got him on 66. I've got him all the way up at 53 compared to you guys. His ECR ranking is about 69. But I also have Keenan Allen around 46, and you guys are higher on Keenan Allen. I think Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are much closer than we think. We talked about it on some best ball episodes when going over Quentin Johnson picks, and we've talked about how QJ is potentially going to replace Mike Williams. And sure, that's all possible. I'm pretty high on QJ this year too, but no broken ribs for Herbert. Their offensive line should be fully healthy. They have a new OC in Kellen Moore. They've got hopefully a healthy Mike, hopefully a healthy Keenan, and obviously a rookie in QJ, Eckler. I just think there's enough to go around there. I mean, Herbert's thrown for 5,000 yards already. He threw for 4,700 last year in a down year and only threw for 25 touchdowns, like similar to what Trevor Lawrence had. There's more meat on that bone that's left over in the Herbert rocket arm that I love so much. I'm pretty high on the Chargers offense in general. Keeping Keenan and Mike pretty close in my rankings I feel like that every year though, right? Like if I could draft Keenan or Mike, they're always right there at the board. I'm kind of the same on it this year. I almost feel like they're both really, really good picks, but you guys are super low on Mike. Is that due to injury or QJ?
Keenan Allen was just really fucking good when he played last year. Like really, really good. His yards per route run was top 12 in the NFL. He was an absolute monster. I think QJ and Mike are going to eat into their target share and eat into each other's production. And I'm willing to kind of wait on either one of those guys and pick them up if I'm able to get a value. I just think Keenan Allen was ridiculously good last year when he played. The hamstring was a bummer. It was tough to see. As someone who's drafted Keenan Allen and gone to fantasy championships for years with Keenan Allen as the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, I think Keenan's the guy, and I love Gerald Everett in that offense, Austin Eckler too. I'm cool if Mike Williams is really good and I didn't draft him. I'm totally okay with that happening.
Yeah, I think I've got a lot of the same points as Shaun. Keenan Allen, in my opinion, especially in PPR leagues, typically fetches 8 to 12 targets a game. Given the separation he gets in his routes at all three levels of the field, is just a much safer buy for me. And then you mentioned health too. It's like Mike Williams' skill set absolutely fits this new offense that they want to run. But how many games am I going to get out of Mike Williams is like a question that you don't know year in and year out, which really scares me. And I think, as you start to see it year over year after year with these same injuries, especially with the back, it's what's your appetite for risk at that point, which is typically more than I'd be willing to go for. So, yeah, I'm definitely pro Keenan. I'm pro Herbert. I like Mike and I like QJ, but I don't know. I'm definitely skeptical about Mike Williams, mainly because of the health, and Keenan Allen.
I think I'm pro all three of them this year. I'm pro all Chargers pass catchers this year. If something falls to me, I'm pretty interested.
So just draft Herbert, right? Maybe that's just the best solution. Just draft Herbie in the 5th or 6th round.
It's
you get
awesome.
exposure to all this. Yeah, I love it. I think last one before we get out of here, the two of you are super down on this guy. I think he's set up for a really big season after how he finished last year. Talk me through your guys' reasoning on ranking TJ Hawkinson as low as you guys have him. I think expert consensus ranking has him at 32. I have him at 40. You guys have him at 50 and 53 respectively. So talk me through that thought process with why we're so down on TJ Hawkinson.
I think the first one for me is Jordan Addison. I think Jordan Addison's going to step in right away and command 100-plus targets. I think he fits that offense perfectly and is a massive upgrade from Adam Thielen. And then the second for me is just kind of other guys that are going in that range. This ties back again to a conversation we had earlier. Like, I'm just not very comfortable investing that type of draft capital early. So, again, where did I put TJ Hawkinson? I've got TJ Hawkinson at 53 in my rankings. A couple of guys in that similar range who I'm taking over him at other positions are guys like Chris Godwin, guys like Drake London, Terry McLaurin, guys that I see more upside and that I'm just more comfortable with drafting at the position. So I think there's two main points. It ties back to earlier. Tight end, I really can't stomach. That's a middle, like, third-round pick that I'd be looking at for TJ Hawkinson, where you have him, which, in my opinion, is too early with just kind of the way that I like to build out teams. So, again, I love Hawkinson. I think he'll be a top 5 tight end probably this year, but it really just comes down to other guys around him and my philosophy around roster building.
Value for me. I mean, I have him at 50, I think is a pretty appropriate place for him to go, to be honest, because like Aidan said, at 38, I'm drafting guys like, Amari Cooper, and this is according to my rankings, people like Joe Mixon are around that range. And mind you, some of these guys are dropped because I have that like run of QBs like in the mid 20s, right? And it's like it's kind of dropping some players down. But I see players as Calvin Ridley is a better value, or Christian Kirk is a better value. Debo is a better value. DJ Moore, I think, is a better value than TJ Hawkinson. And we did talk about it in the beginning, but just tight ends and investing in that. And I will play devil's advocate. I could be totally off on this because they will pass at, I would say almost, I would bet that they are a top 2 passing offense this year, especially with Dalvin Cook gone. Like, they are going to pass the fuck out of the ball this year. So there is a lot of love to go around. And I don't think like KJ Osborne is going to infringe on TJ Hawkinson shares, but you add Jordan Addison in, that's 100 plus targets there. And it does dwindle his output just a little bit. And I still think there's more room for Justin Jefferson too. So, but they need a new red zone target without Thielen. So I could be way off on the Hawkinson thing. He could be the new Thielen for them. That's who they find in the end zone a lot. But it's a value thing for me, Shaun. It's a value at a position that I absolutely hate. Let's just ban the tight end position and put a wide receiver or another flex.
On the other hand, Shaun, what's kind of your reason for putting him a little higher than us and a little ahead of? But I think it's slightly ahead of ECR, right? Actually, no, it's below.
TJ Hawkinson, in 8 games with the Vikings last year, earned 97 targets. So that you break that down, that's over 12 targets a game. On pace for a 200 target season. Yeah, if he gave his last season on the Vikings a 17-game pace, he was on pace for 206 targets, 149 catches, and 1,377 yards. Now, is that replicable over a full season? That's a good question. They did add Jordan Addison, but I think he's going to play a really big role in a high-volume passing offense, and I think he's by far and away a top 3 option on this team. It doesn't matter how talented we think TJ Hawkinson is. Is he better than George Kittle? Absolutely not. This guy is going to get volume, and he's going to see a potentially 100-catch season. And that's incredibly valuable. Think about what Zach Ertz used to be on fantasy teams. Just PPR god. I envision that for TJ Hawkinson, and I could see him averaging 14 to 15 fantasy points per game this year in a position where your other guy you're playing against might average 10, and it's really touchdown dependent. So I think he gives you a nice edge. He has a clear role in this offense. I think this offense passes the ball a ton. And it's hard to deny the production that he had at the end of last year. And the Vikings did trade a first-round pick for him, so they want him. He's an important part of their offense.
Shaun, if you go all the way back to 2019, there has only been, in each of seasons, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, there's only ever been 2 tight ends like at the position to average more than 14 points a game, or 3 in 1 year. But that's a top tight end fantasy production. That is like very high tier production.
Well, he averaged 13 a game last year. I think he averaged like 15 or 16 a game when he was on the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, that puts him in the upper echelon, right? Like, that is, sorry, in 2021, there was a couple. That was a better tight end year. But the point I'm trying to make is,
I think he's there.
You're banking on him to be basically Kelsey. Top 100 receptions would be 10 less than Kelsey last year. 1,000 yards definitely makes him. I mean, he caught 914 yards last year. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just his ceiling that you're projecting him at is about another 1.5 a game on average, which is definitely doable. But it's just, it didn't get less competitive in their offense. That's for sure.
He got traded he started playing for the Vikings in week 9. 16 points, 11.5 points, 8.4, 15.3, 7.3, 11.7, 8.3, 35.9, and 13 points.
So he has an outlier.
Tight end.
But okay, so his average is being built up
as an outlier.
A 35-point outing, right?
1, 2,
that game
3,
against the Giants,
4, 5. Half of his games he finished as a top 6 tight end. Half his games
relative to a shitty position.
Tight end was awful last year. Tight end was
truly awful.
Bad as it was.
I think
there was no middle class.
What it's going to come down to with Hawk is like, how comfortable are you taking him that early? Because I don't deny the ceiling with him. It's just a matter of, are you okay with taking him that early, or just taking a tight end in general that isn't named, Kelsey and Mark Andrews? Because it's like you're gonna have to pony up some pretty good draft capital for him for sure.
Give me Darren Waller over TJ Hawkinson this year.
I don't think I'm doing that.
No. He's always hurt.
He's
always hurt, but he could lead his team in targets and yards, so that's why Darren Waller's. Okay, that's it. We're taking a timeout on tight end talk. That we've spent 20 minutes of an hour-long podcast talking about the position that we all
I hate
love.
them. I hate
But
them.
this was great. That Watson argument was putting that in our mixtape. That's in our highlight mixtape.
I didn't know Keegan was coming to my aid. I thought I was going to be 2v1 there, and
Sean's the guy that's running that fucking Packers Twitter that keeps talking about. I know it is. Yeah, Shaun is running that fucking Packers burner. He keeps doubling down on the take. Now he's just trolling us. That's Shaun.
I love it. The minute we talked about Rodgers and Love, Keegan had a vested interest in defending that. So I loved him coming to the defense of
that was amazing. It was really nice to have you, Keegan.
It was really
same time next week,
stuff. Man. Bears fan and a Jets fan walk into a bar. All right, boys, it's going to be a little while till we record next. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you're still listening, thank you for being a part of the Mean Team. We appreciate you. We're nothing without you. Before we sign off, boys, you got anything else to say?
Love you.
I got nothing.
Christian Watson, wide receiver, 1 season, baby.
Oh, my God.